I'm Evelyn Hart, and the night I realized love had a price tag, I was seated beneath a crystal chandelier, surrounded by people who only smiled when it served them. One signature was all it would take to silence my voice forever, and the man I loved didn't say a word in my defense. Before I share everything that happened next, tell me, where are you watching this video from? I'd love to know, so drop your city or country in the comments. And if you've ever been asked to give up a part of yourself just to keep the peace, this one's for you. The room sparkled. That's the first thing I remember. Everything glittered: the champagne, the flatware, the diamonds stitched into the neckline of Tyler's mother's dress. Even the butter looked polished on its silver tray. I had never felt more like a visitor in someone else's life. We were seated at the long end of a 12-person mahogany dining table, deep in the heart of a Manhattan penthouse that belonged to Tyler's parents, the Carmichaels. The kind of place that made you sit up straighter just to match the furniture. "I hope you like sea bass," his mother, Celeste, had said with that same smile she always wore, tight, perfect, and utterly unreadable. The wine had just been poured when someone cleared their throat. I turned slightly. Tyler's father, Winston, leaned forward. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "Evelyn, dear. We thought we'd get this little formality out of the way." A white envelope was slid across the table toward me. Monogrammed. Heavy paper. Legal weight. "What's this?" I asked, even though I already knew. Somewhere inside my chest, something twisted. Celeste answered smoothly. "Just the standard prenup, darling. Nothing unusual. We have them drawn up for all family marriages. Keeps everything tidy." My fingers hesitated on the envelope. Tyler said nothing. He was looking down at his napkin, folding and unfolding it like a child with a secret. I should have smiled. I should have played along. That's what polite girls do, right? But I couldn't. "I didn't know we were doing this tonight," I said softly, trying to keep the quiver out of my voice. Winston chuckled. "Why not? We're all together. It's efficient." Efficient. Celeste took a delicate sip of wine. "There's no implication, Evelyn. We simply protect our interests. You understand." I stared at the envelope. "Is that what I am now?" I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. "An implication?" The room shifted. Not visibly, but I felt it. The atmosphere tightened, like someone had turned down the oxygen. Tyler's sister glanced at her husband with raised brows. A servant hesitated in the doorway before quietly backing out. "Evelyn," Tyler finally spoke, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's just paperwork." I looked at him, really looked. His face was pale. His hands were still. And I realized in that instant he'd known. He'd known they were going to do this, and he hadn't warned me. I wanted to say his name. I wanted to ask, "Why didn't you protect me?" But instead, I stood up. The chair scraped back loudly. All eyes on me now. I felt the tears threaten, but I blinked fast and forced them down. "Not here. Not in front of them." "I won't be signing anything tonight," I said, carefully placing the envelope back on the table. "Enjoy your sea bass." And with that, I turned and walked out of the room. The silence behind me was deafening. I didn't wait for the elevator. I took the stairs, my heels clacking down polished marble like gunfire. My fingers were still shaking when I unlocked the door to our Brooklyn apartment. It was the first place that had ever felt like mine, modest but charming, with old radiators that clanked in the winter and a fire escape I turned into a little herb garden. We'd chosen it together, Tyler and I, just 6 months ago. Back then, I thought love could grow anywhere, even in noisy buildings with peeling hallway paint. I kicked off my heels and dropped my coat onto the hook, hearing the muffled clink of my grandmother's wind chime from the open kitchen window. That sound usually calmed me. Not tonight. Tyler was already home. He sat on the couch, scrolling his phone like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't walked out of his parents' dinner as if I'd been set on fire. He looked up casually. "You left in the middle of the main course." That was it. Not "Are you okay?" Not "I'm sorry." Just that. I blinked at him in disbelief. "That's what you want to open with?" Tyler sighed and set his phone down. "Look, Evie. It was just a dinner. My parents were being themselves. You know how they are. Exactly, I said, my voice rising. Which is why you should have told me. Prepared me. Instead, I'm the idiot at the table opening a legal document like it's a birthday card. He stood and walked into the kitchen, pouring a glass of water like we weren't in the middle of unraveling. It's standard procedure, he muttered. You heard my mom. I followed him. Don't parrot your mother to me right now, Tyler. I'm not angry because it's procedure. I'm angry because you let them blindside me. And you sat there while it happened. His jaw flexed, that subtle sign he was getting defensive. What was I supposed to do? Make a scene at my parents' house. I folded my arms tightly. Oh, so it was better for me to be the one who looked dramatic? Who stood up and walked out while you said nothing? I didn't want to escalate things, he said flatly. You mean you didn't want to upset them? He didn't deny it. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Tyler, I said, softer now, exhausted. Do you even see how humiliating that was for me? He rubbed the back of his neck, finally meeting my eyes. You're making too much of it. They're just trying to protect the family assets. That's not personal. Of course it's personal, I snapped. I'm about to become part of that family. And they handed me a contract like I'm applying for a job, not marrying their son. He rolled his eyes, just barely. Evie, you're being emotional. And there it was. The phrase that cleaved the air between us. My mouth went dry. Don't. What? Don't dismiss me like that. You don't get to call me emotional when I'm standing here telling you I was blindsided, humiliated, and made to feel like some gold-digging inconvenience. He looked genuinely baffled now, like I was speaking a language he didn't understand. It's not about you, Evelyn. It's about money. You don't come from that world. You wouldn't understand. I stepped back. Something inside me shifted, clicked into place. There it was, spelled out in plain daylight. You don't come from that world. Not we, not us, you. So I was on the outside, still. Even after years together. Even after building this life. I was still the outsider they tolerated, not the woman they embraced. Do you think I'm with you for your family's money? I asked, genuinely curious. His pause lasted too long. And that told me everything. My throat ached with the effort not to cry. You know what's sad? I whispered. I never expected them to love me. But I expected you to stand by me. Just once. He exhaled. Can we not do this tonight? It's been a long day. I gave a hollow laugh. Yeah, it has. I grabbed a throw blanket from the couch and walked toward the bedroom. You're not going to sleep out here, he called after me. I paused in the hallway. No, I said. But tonight I need to be alone in my own bed. That okay with you? Or should I sign something first? The door closed quietly behind me. I lay awake for hours, listening to the city, the creaks of the old pipes, and the echo of his indifference. That night, I realized something terrifying. Maybe the silence at that dinner table wasn't the betrayal. Maybe the real betrayal was waiting for me here at home. The city hummed outside my window, a low lullaby of taxi engines and distant sirens, but sleep didn't come. Not even close. I stared at the cracked ceiling of our bedroom, Tyler's cologne still clinging to the pillow beside mine. But he wasn't in bed. He never came in. The living room was his sanctuary tonight, and mine was the solitude of 100 thoughts I couldn't slow down. I kept replaying the look on his face, blank, almost irritated, when I'd told him I felt betrayed. Like he couldn't understand why I was still so upset. Like I should have already moved on. Was I overreacting? Or had I just finally stopped underreacting? I sat up and reached for the leather-bound journal tucked under the bed. It was a gift from my friend Willa back in college, something about writing to remember who you are. I'd filled pages over the years, mostly quietly, in times when I didn't trust my voice out loud. Tonight, I trusted nothing but the page. I always thought love was supposed to be a shelter. A place you run toward when the world gets ugly. But tonight, the place I ran to became another courtroom. Another silence I couldn't decode. And I'm starting to wonder, if wealth requires submission and love demands silence, then what exactly am I signing up for? I paused, staring at the ink before it dried. My handwriting looked different somehow. Angrier. Older. The truth sat heavy in my chest. This wasn't just about a prenup. It wasn't about contracts or clauses or numbers on a page. It was about the slow erosion of who I was allowed to be next to Tyler Carmichael. I thought back to the first time I met his parents, how Celeste called me sweet and asked if I grew up around artists, which was code for, "Are your people poor but charming?" I remembered how Winston once joked about public school girls having grit, like it was a novelty. A quirk. Back then, I'd laughed politely. Smiled. I wanted to belong. But now, under the weight of that contract, I realized I never would. I used to think marrying Tyler meant building a life together. Now I'm not sure if I'm building something or being built into something. A quiet fixture. A compliant wife. The kind they can clap for at galas because I wear the right shoes and say the right things. I stopped writing. My pen hovered midair, hand trembling slightly. Would I lose him over this? The question came uninvited. I didn't want it, but it arrived like an earthquake under everything I'd built. And worse, had I already started losing myself? The bedroom was dimly lit by the glow of our street lamp. Outside, someone laughed too loudly down the block. A dog barked once, then nothing. I laid back down, the journal still open on my chest, words staring up like witnesses. Tyler and I had talked about wedding venues just last weekend. I'd shown him a photo of a vineyard I loved, small, charming, surrounded by autumn trees, and he'd smiled. Said it was cute. But that his parents would probably prefer something with legacy. Legacy. That word again. In the Carmichael world, legacy came with invisible price tags, quiet wives, obedient children, and contracts that only went one way. And here I was, trying to squeeze into that frame. But what if it broke me? I reached over and turned off the bedside lamp. The room fell into darkness. But the question stayed lit. Was I marrying a man or an institution? And if I signed that contract, would there be anything left of me to marry? The next morning, I stood outside my parents' townhouse in Queens, half wishing I'd turned back at the subway stop. The bricks were chipped in places, the railing a little rusted, but it was home, my childhood, my comfort, my reset button. I needed that today. I needed my mother's arms and my father's steady voice to tell me I wasn't crazy. I rang the bell. My mother, Lorraine, opened the door still in her robe, rollers in her hair. Evelyn. Her voice lifted with surprise and a hint of concern. What are you doing here, sweetheart? Is everything okay? I just needed to talk, I said. She stepped aside without hesitation. Of course. Come in. Inside smelled like warm toast and brewed chicory coffee. The old living room couch was still covered in that same floral slipcover, fraying at the corners. My dad, Harold, sat at the dining table in his reading glasses, scanning the newspaper. He looked up, startled. Evie? You're a sight. Everything all right with Tyler? I hesitated, just long enough for both of them to notice. I didn't ease into it. I couldn't. The moment felt like a balloon I'd been holding underwater. They gave me a prenup last night, I said. At a formal dinner. Just handed it over like a menu. Mom's brows shot up. A prenup? Well, that's unexpected. My dad folded his paper slowly, his eyes narrowing with a seriousness I rarely saw. Did Tyler say anything? Nothing. He just let them do it. Like it was normal. Mom sat beside me, placing her hand gently on mine. Honey, I know that must have felt awful. But maybe they're just being cautious. Cautious. My voice broke despite me. They think I'm marrying him for money, Mom. Dad cleared his throat. It's probably just standard procedure in families like his. I stared at him. So that's it? I should just sign it? Pretend it doesn't humiliate me. They exchanged a glance. One of those long-married looks that communicates volumes. Sweetheart, Mom said softly, this marriage, it's not just about feelings. It's about securing your future. You know how hard life can be without financial stability. Maybe this is just part of entering that world. I pulled my hand away, suddenly cold. You're telling me to accept it, I said. To be quiet. Smile. Sign. Don't be dramatic, Mom replied, a touch sharper now. We're just saying, you could build a beautiful life with Tyler. And if this little contract is part of it, it's not little, I snapped. It says I get nothing. No joint ownership. No share of anything built during the marriage. I'd walk in with love and walk out with whatever still in my purse. Silence. Then Dad spoke, his voice low. It's not fair, Evie. But sometimes life isn't. That hit harder than I expected. I stood up, feeling like a guest in the house I grew up in. So that's your advice? Sign and smile. It's just paper, honey, Mom insisted. You'd still have love. I looked her in the eye. Would I? She said nothing. But then, just as I turned toward the door, she murmured something almost absent-mindedly. Your grandmother, she always said she was saving something for you. For when Evelyn truly needs it, she used to say. I froze. What? Mom blinked. Oh, it was years ago. Probably nothing. I think she meant an old recipe or a piece of jewelry or something sentimental. No. What exactly did she say? She frowned, trying to remember. We were in her kitchen. You were maybe 16? She was reorganizing her pantry and muttering about how she was going to hide that thing until you needed it. I asked what she meant, and she just smiled and said, there'll come a day when Evelyn will need to remember who she really is. That's when it'll matter. A chill ran through me. And you never asked again? Mom shrugged. Your grandmother was always a little theatrical. I stared at her, pulse quickening. Did she ever mention it again? Not to me, she said. But if she hid something, I'd guess it's at her cottage. Grandma Lillian's cottage. Nestled upstate, near Cold Spring. The place where she taught me how to make lavender tea and told me stories about the women in our family. The place that had always felt a little enchanted. Evie, Mom added, don't go chasing fairy tales. Just think about what you want. Really want. Because the rest, it's just noise. But I couldn't unhear it now. Something had been left for me. And maybe, just maybe, it was the thing I needed to remember who I was before all of this. The call came just after sundown. I was curled up on my sofa, knees tucked under a blanket, trying to reread a novel I'd loved in college. But my eyes kept skipping the lines, and every time I turned the page, I couldn't remember what I'd just read. My thoughts kept circling the same dark drain. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Manhattan area code. I knew who it was before I answered. Hello. Evelyn. It's Celeste Carmichael. Even her voice carried pearls. Hi, I replied carefully. I hope I'm not calling too late, she said, though we both knew she was exactly on time. I understand there was some difficulty at dinner. I stayed quiet. Let her fill the silence. I'd like to invite you to a private dinner. Just the two of us. Some were quiet. Neutral. I think we should clear the air, don't you? She made it sound like we were two diplomats who had misread each other's emails, not a woman who had handed me a contract as if I were being screened for access to her son's fortune. Still, something about her tone caught me off guard. She wasn't sharp. Not yet. It was almost gentle. I think that's a good idea, I said. Wonderful, she replied, with what almost passed for warmth. Tomorrow evening. I'll send a car for you at 7. And with that, the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long minute. My instincts should have screamed no. But instead, I felt a strange curiosity. Not hope. Not dread. Just a cautious sense that this was a moment I needed to witness, if only to see what the next move would be. The next evening, I dressed with care. Not to impress. Not to please. But to prepare. A navy blue dress that hugged my waist without being tight. A high neckline, long sleeves, elegant, understated. The kind of outfit that said, I'm not easily rattled. I wore my hair up and a pair of vintage pearl studs my grandmother had given me the Christmas before she passed. As promised, the car arrived at 7 sharp. A sleek black town car, all shine and silence. The driver, in a crisp suit, opened the door with a nod. Miss Hart. The route took us upstate, to a country club I'd only heard of in whispers, the kind of place where menus didn't have prices and reputations were traded like stock. We drove through a wrought iron gate, down a winding gravel path flanked by manicured hedges. The main building loomed ahead, lit like a cathedral, elegant, and a little intimidating. The hostess led me through the main dining room and then beyond, to a smaller, private lounge with velvet chairs and flickering candles. Celeste was already seated, sipping something amber in a short crystal glass. She stood as I approached. Evelyn, she said, smiling with something that could almost pass as sincerity. Thank you for coming. I sat across from her, careful to mirror her poise, but not her pretense. She waved a hand, and a server appeared as if summoned by thought. Tea, she asked me. I'll take a ginger ale, thank you. She raised a brow. Still so refreshingly simple. And, just like that, the room's warmth dimmed by half a degree. I wanted us to speak without distractions, she said. I worry that things were misunderstood. Were they? I asked. She folded her hands on the table, her rings catching the candlelight. You're about to marry into a legacy, Evelyn. Not just a man. There it was. The Carmichael name carries weight, she continued. It must be protected. Not from you, of course, but from the world. From risk. From sentiment. I said nothing. Just let her dig the trench. You're intelligent. I know that. That's why I trust you'll understand what I'm about to say. She leaned in, her voice velvet soft. If you love Tyler, and I believe you do, you'll sign the agreement. Quietly. Respectfully. Without further disruption. She smiled. And in return, you will always be taken care of. My stomach turned. Is that a threat? Her smile didn't falter. It's a suggestion. For your benefit. And for Tyler's reputation. I looked at her and saw it clearly now, the precision behind every word, every look. She wasn't here to make peace. She was here to make sure I stayed in line. But I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, my fingers wrapped around the cold glass. I appreciate the dinner, Celeste. But if you're asking me to trade my voice for a last name, you'll be disappointed. For a flicker of a second, I saw it, the crack in her expression. Not anger. Not fear. Just surprise. And that was enough to carry me through the rest of the evening. I left with my head high and my dignity intact. But deep inside, I knew something had shifted. This wasn't just a marriage anymore. It was a chess game. And I just moved my first piece. The drive back from the country club should have felt victorious. I hadn't flinched. I hadn't signed. I hadn't begged. But the further I got from Celeste's honeyed threats, the heavier my chest became. I stared out the car window, watching the lights blur past, my reflection faint in the glass. Calm on the outside. But inside? Something was unraveling. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt on my lips. The next morning, I barely spoke. Tyler noticed, of course. Asked if I was feeling sick. I nodded, which wasn't exactly a lie. Something in me was sick of pretending, of playing it cool, of watching him pretend not to see the things I now couldn't unsee. I thought the country club dinner was the end of it. But I was wrong. Because that afternoon, I received another message, this time from Winston. A text, short and formal, join us for lunch at Langston Clubhouse. Just the three of us. Tyler doesn't need to be present. We'd like to offer clarity. Clarity. Funny word, coming from people who deal in shadows. Still, I agreed. Not because I wanted to. Because I needed to know just how far they were willing to go. The Langston Clubhouse was quieter than the country club, more traditional, leather chairs, soft jazz, framed oil portraits of stoic men who had built things. Celeste was already seated at a table in a corner booth. Winston stood as I approached, ever the gentleman in posture if not in principle. Evelyn, he greeted me. Thank you for making time. I nodded and slid into the booth, opposite them both. Celeste wore navy silk today, her pearls tighter than usual. We'll keep this brief, she said, folding her napkin slowly. There are certain expectations that come with marrying into our family. Which you've mentioned, I replied, tone neutral. Winston leaned in. Let's not pretend this is just about assets. It's about perception. About who we are and who people believe we are. That includes spouses. Celeste took over. If you were to refuse the prenup, what would people assume? That you're angling for a payout? That you're hoping for a divorce down the line? I'm not the one who brought up divorce, I said quietly. Everyone plans for risk, Winston countered. That's why we insure cars, homes, health. Love is no different. I set down my water glass. Is Tyler aware you've asked me here today? Celeste smiled. We didn't want to burden him with this. He's sensitive. That word again. Sensitive when it mattered to him. Silent when it mattered to me. Winston reached into a leather folder and slid a sheet across the table. A revised agreement, more polished, more generous in tone, but the same structure. Still a fortress built to keep me out. We've made some amendments, he said. You'll find it more palatable. But the heart remains. Sign this, and everything continues smoothly. No more tension. No more uncertainty. And if I don't? I asked, my voice steady. They exchanged a look. Celeste's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Well, she said slowly, we wouldn't want the press to start speculating, would we? Especially so close to the wedding. Tyler's reputation matters a great deal in our circles. Winston chimed in. There's also the matter of your parents. They're proud, of course. It would be such a shame if this created awkwardness for them. Or for you. There it was. The veil lifted. Polite blackmail, served with lemon water and folded linen. I stared at the document, then looked at them both. I see, I said simply. Then, with deliberate care, I folded the contract and slid it back across the table untouched. I'll need time, I said. To think. To speak with Tyler. To breathe. Celeste nodded once, stiffly. Winston reached for the paper without another word. I stood. Thank you for lunch, I said. And then I walked away. Not fast. Not angry. But steady. Because I'd just seen the walls they'd built. And I was done trying to pretend I wanted to live inside them. I didn't go home. After the lunch that wasn't really lunch, after the contract that wasn't really negotiable, after the veiled threats dressed as kindness, I drove. No destination typed into my phone. Just instinct. And instinct took me north. 2 hours and several wrong turns later, I pulled into the gravel driveway of my grandmother Lillian's cottage. Evening was falling. The porch light flickered to life as I parked, and there was her silhouette in the window, curled in her armchair with a book and a teacup, like always. The moment I stepped onto the porch, she opened the door before I could knock. Evelyn. That was it. Just my name. No surprise, no urgency. As if she'd been waiting. I walked in without a word, and the scent hit me like memory itself. Orange peel, cinnamon bark, and something floral I could never name. The air inside the cottage always felt warmer than the weather outside, like it belonged to another season. You look tired, she said. I am. Hungry. No. Still tea, then, she murmured. She moved slowly, methodically, as she always did. Boiled water, added chamomile, honey, a pinch of crushed mint leaves. She handed me the mug without asking for details. We sat in silence for a while. She watched the fire crackle. I watched her watch the fire. And then, because I couldn't hold it anymore, I spoke. I think they want to own me, Grandma. She didn't look at me. Just sipped her tea. His parents. They keep trying to make me small. First with contracts, now with guilt. It's like they don't want a wife in the family, they want a pawn. Still, she said nothing. They invited me to a private lunch, I continued. Tyler wasn't even there. They pushed a new version of the prenup across the table like it was a peace offering. But it wasn't. It was a leash with silk trim. Lillian glanced at me then. Her eyes were sharper than they used to be. Not cruel. Just unclouded. I told them I'd think about it, I added. But all I really wanted was to scream. She nodded. And Tyler? Still says nothing. Another nod. I felt the tears welling again. Am I being dramatic? No. They say I should be grateful. That I'm marrying into something rare. Something permanent. Are you? I blinked. Am I what? Grateful. I didn't answer. She leaned back in her chair, setting her tea on the side table. Her fingers laced together slowly in her lap. I once had a man who promised me permanence, she said. He wore expensive shoes and called me darling, even when he was lying. Promised a life with velvet curtains and a silver dining set. Told me I was the kind of girl who could be displayed, but never the kind who could speak. I stared at her. You never told me that. I didn't think you needed the story until now. What happened? I walked, she said simply. And I never looked back. I swallowed hard. How did you know it was time? Her eyes finally met mine. You know, she said. That's why you're here. My throat tightened. The fire popped behind us. A gust of wind pressed gently against the window panes, but the warmth in the room held steady. I reached for her hand. She didn't flinch, didn't squeeze. but her fingers rested in mine like truth. I whispered, "I'm so tired of proving I belong to people who only ever want to own me." Lillian smiled faintly. "That's the first honest thing you've said all year." Lillian didn't say a word. She just stood up gracefully, despite her age, and walked down the narrow hallway that led to her study. I watched her go, my mug still warm in my hands, my heart thudding like something was coming. Something final. The study door clicked shut. I sat there in the silence of her living room, staring into the fire and trying not to read too much into her quiet departure. Maybe she was getting an old journal. A letter. A family keepsake meant to console, not confront. But when she returned, she was carrying a metal box. It was small, brushed silver, locked, and in her other hand, a sealed manila envelope. My breath caught. She placed both gently on the coffee table between us, then sat down again, adjusting her shawl like nothing was unusual. "This," she said, tapping the box, "was prepared a long time ago." "For me?" I asked, barely above a whisper. She nodded. "From me. With instructions from your grandfather. Though he didn't live to see the day we'd need it." "What is it?" She took a slow breath. "It's a kind of truth." I stared at the lock. "I don't understand." "You will." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a delicate key gold with a tiny heart-shaped bow. She placed it in my hand like it was something sacred. With trembling fingers, I fit it into the lock. It clicked open. Inside was paper, folders, legal documents. Some bound in crisp sleeves, others neatly labeled with post-its in her handwriting. I lifted one, scanning it quickly. Then another. And then my eyes froze on a line of bold black print. Beneficiary, Evelyn Hart Trust Total, $11 million. 00 disbursement date, conditional, available upon personal request, postage 28. My mouth went dry. What is this?" Lillian leaned forward. "It's yours." "I don't how." She smiled faintly. "Your grandfather was many things. Quiet, soft-spoken, and far more cunning than people gave him credit for. He built up assets quietly. Stocks, land, patents. He hated what the Carmichaels stood for, how they traded decency for image. Before he passed, he set up a trust. For you." I stared at the numbers. They looked like fiction. Like code. "This is real." "Every penny," she said. "But it was never about the money. It was about timing. About you. About when you'd need to remember that you never had to ask for a seat at anyone's table." I blinked back tears. "All this time," I said. "You never told me." "You weren't ready," she said. "Money handed too soon becomes weight, not power. You needed to grow your spine before you inherited your sword." The words landed in me like thunder. I looked down at the folder again. I could walk away. From all of it. From Tyler. From the contracts. "I don't have to prove anything now." "You never did," she said. "But now you have proof of it." I laughed, soft and broken. And then, Lillian's tone shifted, gentler but firmer. "But Evelyn," she said, "before you use this, you need to be clear." "About what?" "This is not a weapon. It's a mirror. If you use it to punish, it will poison you. If you use it to free yourself, it will carry you forward. That's the difference between revenge and clarity." I let that sink in. "I don't want to be cruel," I said finally. She nodded. "Then don't be. But don't be quiet either." I closed the box slowly, reverently. Like I was tucking away a version of myself I had just met. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something besides fear. I felt choice. Back in Brooklyn, the city didn't feel quite as loud. Something in me had shifted. I moved through my apartment like someone who had finally stopped apologizing for her own presence. I folded laundry. I tidied the bookshelf. I made lists. Not just to-do lists, but clarity lists. Things I was willing to compromise on. Things I wasn't. Things I thought I wanted, and things I now knew I deserved. The metal box from my grandmother sat on my desk, still locked though I now had the key. I didn't need to keep opening it. I just needed to remember that it existed. That was enough. I called a lawyer. Willa knew someone, an attorney named Marion Soto, sharp as glass and twice as clear. We met over coffee in a quiet corner cafe in Park Slope, where the hum of espresso machines disguised our conversation perfectly. Marian didn't blink when I handed her the documents. "I've seen these kinds of contracts before," she said. "They look polite, but they're built like traps. Designed to protect legacy at the cost of personal dignity." "Can I rewrite it?" I asked. She smiled. "You can do whatever you want. You have leverage now." That word echoed inside me. Leverage. Not rage. Not revenge. Just balance. The kind that lets you walk into a room without shrinking. Marian helped me draft a short letter, a formal rejection of the current agreement, accompanied by a note of willingness to discuss fair alternatives. No threats. No drama. Just power dressed in restraint. I spent the rest of the week with purpose. I reviewed financial plans. Looked into nonprofits I'd always wanted to support but never felt secure enough to approach. I walked through a flower market and bought myself a bundle of yellow tulips just because they reminded me of Lillian's garden. Tyler called once, just once. He didn't mention the contract. Just asked if I wanted to meet for dinner. I said I needed a few more days. He didn't push. And I didn't volunteer. I needed space. Not to escape him, but to face myself. Because somewhere in the haze of love and expectation, I had forgotten to ask the most important question: was I building a future, or being absorbed into someone else's? That answer was finally becoming clear. By Friday, I felt like my feet were fully beneath me again. I sat at the little kitchen table, tea steeping, journal open, and wrote, "They wanted me to believe that love means surrender. That money means control. But I don't want a marriage where I disappear. I want a union where I can grow. And if Tyler can't stand next to me without the safety net of his family's fear, then maybe I'm not the one who's too emotional. Maybe I'm just the first to stop pretending." I closed the journal and smiled. There was a dinner planned. Another gathering. One final chance, Tyler said, to smooth things over. Both families. Big table. Clean slate. I said yes. But this time, I wouldn't be the one holding back. The invitation came by text. Dinner at the Carmichael's place. Just a way to get everyone on the same page. Would mean a lot if you came. I stared at the message longer than I needed to, not because I didn't know what to say, but because, for once, I wasn't walking into a room to be evaluated. I was walking in on my terms. And when you finally realize that love without respect is just obligation in disguise, something in you stops needing approval. So I said yes. And then I took my time. The evening I got ready, I didn't dress to impress. I dressed to declare. A soft cream blouse tucked into high-waisted tailored slacks, both effortless and crisp. Minimal jewelry, just the heirloom bracelet Lillian gave me last Christmas. I did my makeup with a steady hand, soft gold on my lids, a nude lip, a flush of confidence across my cheekbones. As I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I hadn't met in months. Not the girl who tiptoed around fragile egos. Not the woman who braced herself before every Carmichael dinner. This version stood upright. And she wasn't carrying anyone else's shame. Tyler greeted me at the door with a relieved smile. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," I said. "You look hopeful." He laughed nervously. "I just want this to go smoothly." Smooth is relative. We walked into the dining room together. The room was as extravagant as ever, long table draped in white linen, silver chargers, crystal glasses. A pianist played something delicate in the background, as if elegance alone could erase tension. Celeste and Winston were already seated, each with a glass of wine and that same half-smile they wore like armor. His sister, Aubrey, and her husband flanked one side. My parents were at the far end, clearly coached on posture and politeness. "Evelyn," Celeste purred as I sat down. "So lovely you could join us." I returned the smile. "Of course. Wouldn't want to miss the family celebration." The first course was served. Conversation floated across the table, weather, renovations, some vague comment about an upcoming gala. But beneath it all, there was a humming tension, like everyone was waiting for someone to say what we were all thinking. It was Tyler who finally cleared his throat. "I just wanted to say how grateful I am that everyone came tonight. I know the last couple of weeks have been tense. And I thought maybe if we could just all be honest and respectful, we could find a way forward." His voice was earnest. Nervous. He looked at me then. Evie, I know things haven't been handled well, especially by my family. And I interrupted gently. I have something I'd like to share. The room quieted. I reached down and retrieved a slim envelope from my purse, one I had sealed the night before. I placed it gently on the table in front of me. I brought something for transparency, since that's the theme of the evening. Celeste tilted her head. And what might that be, dear? I smiled, slow and measured. It's a formal copy of my trust documentation, prepared and notarized. It outlines my assets, specifically the $11 million inheritance left to me by my grandfather, with access initiated last week. Dead silence. Only the soft clink of a wine glass being set down too quickly. Winston stared at the envelope like it had teeth. Celeste recovered quickly. Well, that's impressive. Unexpected, Winston added. I nodded. It was meant to be. I didn't know about it until recently, but it's helped me understand a few things. Tyler looked stunned. You never told me. I didn't need to, I said. Until now. I looked directly at his parents. I understand the need to protect what matters to you. Legacy. Reputation. Image. I truly do. But what you asked me to sign wasn't protection, it was submission. And I've spent enough of my life being told to take up less space. I let that land. Then I opened the envelope and slid the first page forward. This is the amount in the account. My name. No cosigners. No restrictions. Which means I have nothing to prove, and even less to fear. Celeste's lips parted, but no sound came. Winston leaned back, visibly recalibrating. I'm not here to fight, I continued. But I won't marry into a family that tries to break me before welcoming me. Tyler looked between them, and finally found his voice. I didn't know they'd go that far, he said. But I should have stood up for you. The table was frozen in time. Then Tyler reached over and took my hand. We won't marry under conditions like this, he said, firmly this time. No contracts built on control. No pressure disguised as tradition. My mother gasped softly. Celeste paled. Winston tensed. But Tyler didn't let go of my hand. And I didn't let go of myself. For a moment, no one moved. Even the pianist must have sensed the air shift. He stopped mid-melody, and the final notes floated like smoke above the silence. The inheritance papers sat on the table like a detonator. But I didn't need them anymore. What they meant had already sunk in. Tyler's hand tightened around mine. Celeste blinked. Once. Twice. Her expression struggled to settle somewhere between disbelief and decorum. Well, she said, in a voice meant to sound amused. That certainly changes things. Does it? I asked calmly. Winston leaned forward, folding his hands like a strategist regrouping. We weren't aware of your financial background, he said, choosing each word like it might explode. I'm aware, I replied. That's what made your approach so revealing. Approach? Celeste echoed. Evelyn, darling, I think there's been a misunderstanding. No, I said gently, there hasn't. I took a breath, not to compose myself, but to make sure I didn't rush what needed to be said. I remember every word from our first dinner. Every pause between the pleasantries. I remember being told I was lucky. I remember being handed a prenup with the dessert menu, like a formality for a transaction. And I remember being expected to smile and nod and play along because, what? I was marrying up. My voice stayed soft. The volume didn't need to rise. The truth was loud enough. I sat through your lectures about legacy. I accepted invitations wrapped in silk and conditions laced in condescension. You tested my silence. You misread it as submission. Winston's jaw twitched. But silence isn't weakness, I said. It's observation. Celeste tried again, her tone cooler now. Surely you don't mean to suggest we were anything less than kind? I asked. Supportive? Transparent. I turned slightly, making sure the entire table could see me. Let me make it simple. I was tested. Quietly. Repeatedly. Not by Tyler, but by the people who claimed to love him most. I was treated like a potential threat. And now that you know I bring more to the table than just affection, suddenly, there's room for reconsideration. A beat passed. Then I looked at Tyler. You've always said you wanted a partner, I told him. Not a passenger. So I'm asking you now, do you want to build a marriage between equals, or do you want to inherit a dynamic? He didn't even hesitate. I want you, he said, louder than I'd ever heard him in that room. Not a contract. Not conditions. Just you. Celeste opened her mouth, but Winston raised his hand, not to her, but to himself. A quiet command. He was retreating, I realized. Internally. Deciding how to pivot, how to survive the loss of control. We won't marry under fear, Tyler added, voice steady. That's final. I rose from my seat. Not in anger, but with the kind of grace that can't be bought or silenced. I looked across the table at all of them. My parents, wide-eyed and breathless. Aubrey, stunned into genuine reflection. And Tyler's parents, faces unreadable. I never needed your approval, I said. Only your honesty. I picked up my purse, tucked the envelope inside. And if you can't offer that, we'll build without you. Then I walked out. No dramatics. No slamming doors. Just the sound of a woman reclaiming her place and leaving behind everything that tried to make her earn it. Tyler followed. Not as a rescue, but as a choice. The door clicked shut behind me. Outside, the night was velvet thick. The Carmichael Estates manicured gardens lay in perfect silence, trimmed hedges and imported stone statues watching as I stepped into the chilled air with steady heels and an even steadier heart. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't trembling. Tyler followed moments later. He didn't call after me. He didn't plead. He just walked beside me, like he understood that if this was still something we would walk through together, it had to be side by side. No more lagging behind his parents' shadows. No more translating my value into something they could measure or contain. I should have done this sooner, he said softly. I looked at him, unsure whether he meant defending me or seeing me. Then do it now, I replied. He nodded. Let's go back in. I blinked. Why? Because I want them to hear it again. But this time, not just from you. The dining room was still frozen in time when we re-entered. Celeste hadn't touched her wine. Winston had resumed a carefully neutral expression. Aubrey looked relieved to see us, but cautious, like someone watching an emotional earthquake still rumbling under the floor. Tyler walked to the head of the table and cleared his throat. I want to make something very clear, he said, his voice firm. Evelyn and I are getting married, but not on anyone else's terms. His father shifted in his seat. Son, this is Tyler held up a hand. I know what this looks like. I know we come from different worlds. But love shouldn't come with prerequisites. You can call it modern or reckless or unwise, but I call it right. He turned to me, not for approval, but to ground himself. She doesn't need your permission. She doesn't need your money. And the fact that you ever made her feel like she did is something I will never let happen again. Celeste stared at him, a flicker of hurt finally cracking through her elegance. And if that means the family name loses a little shine, he added, then maybe it's time it did. That was when I stood again. Not in defense. Not in defiance. Just to speak. To love someone isn't about preserving your comfort, I said. It's about seeing them completely and still choosing them without fear or conditions. I don't want a love that's caged in contracts. I want one that expands like breath. I looked at his parents, calm and clear. Money can protect people. It can build empires. But it can also become a leash. And I've spent my whole life learning how to breathe on my own. I won't forget that now. Winston stood slowly. Evelyn, he said. We misjudged. Celeste remained seated. Still. Almost. Softened. Her hands clasped in her lap like a woman raised in traditions she never had the courage to challenge. No, I said. You saw me clearly. You just hoped I wouldn't see myself that way too. And with that, I left the room. This time for good. Outside, I exhaled fully. Tyler took my hand without a word. There was no victory in his expression, just gratitude. And the beginning of something real. Not a kingdom. Not a transaction. Just us. And that was enough. The morning of our wedding, the sky broke open with sunlight. Not the timid kind, but bold, like the world itself had something to prove. The garden was already buzzing when I arrived, though the ceremony was still an hour away. My best friend Willa handed me a warm cup of lavender tea and smiled. You're glowing, she said. I feel real, I replied. No tiara. No cathedral. No parade of stiff tradition or designer labels. Just rows of wooden chairs nestled between wild roses and ivy. A string quartet softly rehearsing beneath a draped archway of golden autumn leaves. Friends instead of socialites. Laughter instead of expectations. And Tyler, waiting for me at the end of the aisle, in a slate blue suit, his eyes holding none of the nervousness I'd once seen in those Manhattan dining rooms. This wasn't a performance. This was a promise. Lillian was seated in the front row, wrapped in a deep green shawl, her cane resting beside her. She wore a small smile, but her eyes, sharp as ever, missed nothing. When our gazes met, she gave a soft, approving nod. No words were needed. Her presence was the blessing. Behind her, my parents held hands, still slightly stunned by the whirlwind of the past few weeks, but no longer trying to rewrite me. They were learning. We all were. And then, there were the Carmichaels. Winston sat stiffly, but he was quiet. His suit perfect, his gaze heavy but softer. Celeste, for the first time since I'd met her, looked small. Not fragile, just quiet. Her hat was elegant. Her pearls modest. And she watched us like someone finally letting go of a script that no longer made sense. She didn't speak during the ceremony, but she stood when I walked down the aisle. And that was enough. Our vows were handwritten. No religious traditions, no ornate speeches. Just words. True ones. Tyler went first. I've loved you in moments I didn't know how to show it, he said. But today I see you fully. Not as a hope or a partner or a role, but as a force. And I vow to never ask you to shrink again. Not for my comfort. Not for anyone's legacy. And then it was my turn. I spent years trying to be chosen, I said. To be the kind of woman someone would fight for. And it turns out, I had to become her first. Today, I don't vow to be perfect or passive or pleasing. I vow to be honest. To speak even when it's hard. And to love you in a way that never costs me myself. There were tears. There was applause. But what I remember most is the silence just after we kissed, how the wind moved through the trees, like it was agreeing. The reception was held beneath open tents strung with twinkle lights. No name cards. No toasts dripping in hidden messages. Just clinking glasses, live jazz, laughter spilling like champagne from every corner. At one point, I found Lillian watching me from across the garden. She didn't come up right away. But later, when I was alone under the arbor, she approached with her usual quiet timing. You did well, she said, tucking a stray hair behind my ear. So did you, I replied. You raised someone who remembered. She took my hands in hers. I didn't raise you to be rich, she whispered. I raised you to be rich in knowing. In leaving. In loving when it's safe to stay. I blinked back tears. You gave me everything, I said. She smiled. No, sweetheart. You gave it to yourself. I just held the door open. As the sun dipped low, I danced barefoot on the lawn with Tyler. Not a ballroom waltz, but a clumsy, grinning spin that had us laughing like teenagers. He kissed my forehead and whispered, You've changed everything. No, I whispered back. I just remembered who I was before they tried to edit me. He pulled me close. And who is that? A woman no one owns. Not even you. He smiled. Perfect. Love, when it's real, doesn't chain you to comfort. It asks you to be courageous. To choose growth over approval. To risk being misunderstood if it means being truly seen. That's what I learned. That's what we built. Not a legacy made of marble and contracts, but a garden. Messy. Wild. Alive. And entirely ours. Have you ever stepped into a future you weren't supposed to reach and made it your own anyway? Tell me in the comments. Because I did. And I promise you this. Nothing is more powerful than the woman they tried to silence, who learned to speak and never stopped.